Welcome to the Tactical Cyber Podcast, where we transform strategic cyber insights into actionable tactics for everyday implementation. Join your hosts, retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent Darren Mott and Risk Advisory Practice Leader at Warren Averett, Paul Perry. Together, they bring decades of experience from the front lines of cybersecurity and risk management to help business owners and individuals take the actions that will keep their business and personal digital data safe. Each episode, we delve into the world of cybersecurity, sharing real-world experiences, expert interviews, and practical tips to safeguard your digital landscape. It's time to move past cyber strategies and start working cyber tactics.
Good morning, or afternoon, friends, evening, friends, whenever you're listening to this. This is the Tactical Cyber Podcast. I'm your host, retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent Darren Mott. And if you are looking for the live stream, you're going to be looking a long time because there's no live stream on this one because of technology issues, which I still can't figure out. So someday someone will teach me how to do technology on a live stream correctly. But I'm joined with, as always, my co-host, Paul Perry. Paul, welcome. Good afternoon.
Darren, thank you. Glad to be here.
And with us, our special guest, Paige Hanson. Paige, thanks so much for taking the time to pop in.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. So, Paul, I think we'll do the news thing at the end. Well, so let's get right into Paige's stuff because she's got a lot of stuff she can talk about that can really help from the tactical perspective in a lot of different areas. If reading her resume and stuff she's done, I think there's a lot of different areas we can kind of zoom down through that will be unique to kind of how we do this because you have the unique perspective of dealing with law enforcement, dealing with small business, dealing with individuals. So you kind of cover it all, right? So that's awesome. So let's start with how'd you get here? Like as I used to do with the Cyber Guy podcast, how did you get from point A to point B? Because I'm going to guess you didn't start in cybersecurity.
Yeah, you hit that one right on the nose there. Wouldn't you say that's pretty much the entry point for a lot of people within the cybersecurity profession is you didn't mean to. And I was one of the first employees at LifeLock. And that's LifeLock's identity theft protection company. Now it's a global company, but that's almost when identity theft protection services were just beginning or didn't begin. So I really had an opportunity to grow up in the industry. And with that, I had roles within cybersecurity, education, huge education role within law enforcement and victim advocates, military. And I'm sure we'll get into that. But then there's really a need, glaringly obvious need for small businesses, small to medium-sized businesses that aren't, I would say, bucket into we'll get to that later. Don't want to necessarily put the budget towards it, or it's not going to happen to me, which is a symptom. It's a thing we commonly hear a lot, I think, in this industry. It's not going to happen to me. So definitely small businesses is where I really enjoy helping small businesses. I want to see them succeed. So that helps with my background.
So talk about your current company, Secure Labs. How did you get to that? You're the founder? Co-owner?
Co-founder, yes.
Yeah. So
there's three of us.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the three of us. So, I've been in the whole cybersecurity for almost 2 decades, so nearly 2 decades. And because of the small business aspect, and the passion, I guess, really about helping small businesses, the compliance part was a piece that was missing and still is missing for a lot of small businesses. And so understanding that a lot of the enterprise platforms to help manage compliance in the first place are out of price. It's out of budget for a lot of small businesses. Developing first the platform and then the audit ready services to get them ready for the certifications to make sure they actually are following the policies that they have within their company is the first step in becoming more secure as a company.
So when you're talking compliance, are you dealing with small like DIB companies that are doing CMMC and some that are doing HIPAA and some that are don't have a compliance, but they know they need to do compliance, so they have to come up with something on the fly?
Yeah, it starts as just developing. So there's companies that don't know where to start. So just developing their governance, risk, and compliance program. And we have a lot of companies that are, small healthcare is one of them. So HIPAA and getting the policies. It's just there's huge holes in the policies for HIPAA. But there's a lot of companies right now seeking their SOC 2 or ISO 27001 because it's required now to work upstream. And they've been getting away with filling out the self-attestation of their compliance policies or their security policies. But now a lot of upstream partners are requiring the actual certification or certificate that you're following and you are practicing the best practices when it comes to safeguarding the business IP or consumer information.
So I will say Paul is the compliance expert here. So I'm going to turn it over to Paul to throw down some compliance road here. So go ahead, Paul, throw down that compliance road.
Yeah, and Paige, welcome. And, I would say that something you talked about is the resource, right? And I think that's the thing that companies that know they need to do it, they don't have the resource, knowledge, really. And that's really where you are trying to put your expertise with Secure Labs over the years is, hey, we can be that resource when you don't have it. Is that an accurate statement?
100%. And we're finding, the larger the company, the more likely that they have a compliance department or they have that subject matter expert internally. And of course, you can use us as a third-party resource, but really that small to medium-sized businesses, they are already wearing multiple hats. And to also then carve out time and expect someone to be an expert in whichever compliance certification that they're looking for is usually very unlikely. So that's where it helps to partner.
Right. And that's where, in the CPA world, I do SOC 2 almost every day, right? And so the one issue that a lot of companies have is, I don't know what my control set is. I don't know what that control set means, and they usually need somebody, and we always communicate, hey, you need to have somebody write your controls. I got a call earlier this week, hey, I've got a client, they need a SOC 2, can they be done by the end of the month? And all you can really do is laugh, right? Because that's not the way it's going to happen, because they haven't written the controls. And I think a lot of companies, outside of not having the resources, it's the knowledge of, I actually have to be doing something, and I have to agree it to something that we have written down. And that's the biggest lift for a lot of companies is, we're working on our business. We can't go write 75 controls that we now have to make sure we are doing. And so I think that's the biggest compliance issue. One of the things I always talk about is security versus compliance. Mm-hmm. Those are two different things, and people get that wrong, and kind of speak to what you've seen where people do one when they really should have done the other, or they should be applying both. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And it's almost like, and you're talking to a lot of companies are treating it as a checklist. So as in your example where they're saying, oh, we need this done by next month. You're treating that like a checklist and just something you're going to check and then do whatever you want to do for the rest of the year after you get your attestation report. But in reality, it's, to your point, it's something that you implement internally. It's defining your controls, but to your point again, it's just, you need somebody's help to do that, because you really don't know. You do not know what you don't know. And in that case, you have to be very specific.
And you get into the, some companies get into the mistake of going down the ISO path, and it's like, well, wait a minute, I should have gone down the SOC 2 path, or I should have gone down the HIPAA path, or some other path. And people also get that, in my opinion, incorrect when they're trying to figure it out. Does that make sense?
Right. It does. It does make sense. And that's something I see also a lot as well. Yeah.
So with Secure Labs, just asking the question, if somebody were to use it to get the control set in place, it probably doesn't matter which framework they're following, because you can probably map it between the different ones. Would that be an accurate statement?
It is, yes. So the platform allows for cross mapping. So if you are working on, let's say, SOC 2, and you are also looking at, let's say, ISO 27001, any control that matches is going to cross map. So you're already going to see that, 50% of your control set for ISO is already going to be taken care of for SOC 2. And so that's really helpful. And it also can help them determine which path they want to go down if there isn't already a requirement, from a upstream partner that's requiring a certain certification.
Darren, don't want to leave you out of the compliance discussion.
Yeah, so I got two compliance experts here. I'll ask this question because it's something I'm not say battling with, but I'm working with some churches and some nonprofits that have no compliance standards whatsoever. They don't need to do, they don't think they need to do compliance. They should do compliance. So what I'm saying is, well, let's just start with some basic stuff. Because if you're not doing those 10 basic things, or whatever those basic things are, you're not doing ISO 27001. You're not doing the CIS 18. You're not doing NIST 800 171, certainly. So is there a value in at least picking some of the basic controls and getting them secure, getting them compliant with that, and then saying, okay, we've got to that point. You've done these small things to get to this particular point. Then we can deal with all this other stuff. You want to do more compliance down the road, you can. So is like some compliance, even though it's not like maybe everything, but it's some key things, better than nothing.
100%. Getting your foundation of doing the 10 controls, whatever it is. You have nonprofits and churches, working off their home computers or they don't have a network or nothing, nothing is backed up. And insert any kind of small startup kind of process that you would. And that's really dangerous. And especially when scammers tend to lean towards victimizing or at least attempting to get money from and scam those organizations. So having the processes in place certainly allow layers, and layers make it harder than to lose money. Generally, it's going to be money, but also, it just makes it better.
So beyond compliance, let's go with our standard question here on the Tactical Cyber Podcast is since we're talking small and medium businesses, what should they do to implement some safeguards against the cyber threats? Like beyond passwords and multi-factor authentication, we know all that thing, right? What are the things like that you look at that you maybe don't hear all the time that people say, "Ooh, that's a good one. I never thought about that before."
Yeah, I know. It's for me, a lot of it is outside. It's outside of the standard, multi-factor authentication, and make sure, but it'd be taking the next step. Okay, you use multi-factor authentication. Okay, but let's move away from SMS multi-factor authentication and do an app of some sort, or if you have some sort of key fob or something else, because then then it opens up a whole new can of worms on educating. And I think you're shaking your head because it's like you get it, right? It's just like that. It's that next step where it's good, better, and best. Good is having different passwords for every account. Better would be multi-factor authentication where you are using SMS text message. Great. But the best would be to use some sort of app. And that's generally the next step in making their programs more robust.
So how do you get over a company that says, "I can't afford that. I'm not doing that. My CEO doesn't want to do that because he's got to get to his ESPN. He's got to get to his fantasy football team. And it's very hard for him to log in. I don't want to do that."
I know, it's all about convenience versus security, right? You got to tie everything to a number and a budget number. Okay, yes, you are going to pay X amount to implement this within your organization. However, you're going to pay this amount if all of your data is now on the dark web, or you have a security breach and no one trusts your organization anymore. No one wants to donate to your nonprofit because you can't keep my personal information safe. And so there's a trade-off, and generally it's, the convenience versus security. Security is going to have to win on a lot of these when it comes to your reputation and the money you have to even fund your organization in the first place.
Yeah, that single loss event is going to be a lot more than your annualized cost to do the cybersecurity right.
It is. And there's ways, you don't have to do a full-on program. Right. You can implement little things at a time, but at least you're moving the needle towards being more secure. We're not asking you to have a $500,000 budget a year, and that's the thing, especially if you're talking about churches and nonprofits, there are organizations that give away their services for free. Whether organizations like TechSoup has options where you can get antivirus, and other software providers donate their services or heavily discount their services, so nonprofits and churches and civic groups can have the same sort of protections like enterprise groups.
Awesome. Paul?
Earlier, Darren talked about law enforcement, and I think you've trained a lot of law enforcement on identity theft. Kind of what are the challenges you've seen them face as it relates to that? And what are the top things you tell them when an identity theft case occurs? What are the things they need to be focused on? Because to me, that's the tactical piece. And when I do a bunch of presentations, we're talking to businesses, but the individuals come up and they say, "Well, what about me? What about me as an individual?" And so I imagine you've had that discussion a lot. Just curious your thoughts there.
Yeah, with law enforcement, let's face it, the majority of them, when you're going through academy, didn't have a case or a course or even section on identity theft, or maybe it was just a blip. And it wasn't until you got into maybe financial crimes or something more detailed or that you were really going and talking all about identity theft. So one, the training was to bring awareness of the different types of scams and vulnerabilities out there. One of them, even with skimmers. You want your patrol officer to understand and be able to identify what a skimmer looks like. So when you pull someone over and they've got a basket full of skimming equipment, or Bluetooth skimmers, from gas station pumps, blank cards, what you're looking for. You'll be able to identify that. And then you also want, as you go up in rank within the organization, people investigating to understand the resources that are out there. But I think the biggest thing, and really what moved the needle with law enforcement, is that a lot of victims were being turned away when they went to report their crime, because it's, let's face it, it's likely not going to be solved. Your identity theft issue, you're not going to understand, you're not going to know who did it in most cases. Well, it's going to either be familiar fraud, so you exactly know who did it, but you don't want to file a police report because you don't want Uncle Bob to go to jail or pay a fine, whatever it is, or you're not going to, and it's going to be likely somebody from out of this country. So you have law enforcement turning away victims that need a police report to even move forward. And so just even spreading the awareness of filing a police report doesn't necessarily mean you have to investigate the report. That police report number is really what's important for these victims, or it's even to establish themselves as a victim in the first place. So if they have ongoing identity theft issues down the line, they can say, no, in 2006, this happened, and I have documentation, and then likely their course for remediation is going to be a different path than if you didn't have that documentation in the first place.
I think that's what you hear a lot from people when they say, my identity was stolen, or the checks were stolen, as the checkering's been happening all over the country lately. Mm-hmm. Do I go to local law enforcement? Do I go to federal law enforcement? What's the difference? Do they talk? And my argument is tell everybody, right? Because you never know when you're going to be added to another investigation that is already occurring, and that person or that threat action is already being looked at. And so I always tell people, no matter if you think it's going to solve the problem or not, and I'm curious your thoughts on whether it's local or federal or a combination of both.
Combination, definitely. Your local law enforcement in some of the larger metropolitan areas, they do have the ability to file a police report online. So, and with the federal, it's all pretty much online as well. I know I personally like identitytheft.gov. Identitytheft.gov is you're going to fill out an affidavit form, and that affidavit form is going to be similar to a police report. It's not a police report, but you're going to walk you through from the time that you notice identity theft, anything that happened, and it's going to be seen in a lot of lenders' eyes as an official affidavit that you are a victim. So oftentimes that'll even help for what you're trying to do, which is prove yourself. You're trying to prove that it wasn't actually you.
Yeah, and I was dealing with a friend who had an issue, and it was a check that was stolen that was changed, and it was almost 7 months later. And he kind of said, I don't think I'm going to get my money back. And then at the end of the day, the bank came through and got his money back, and they realized, but it was because he kept documentation, right? He had all the documentation of what was supposed to be paid, when it was supposed to be paid. And that really is a success story. And it's in that category of good news that Darren likes to talk about, but it's sometimes we do win, right? And we have to talk about it, and we have to talk about how we won. And our one was we had documentation, and that's what you're talking about. Get that case number so that you can show people, yes, I truly was a victim. Here is what it was. And so I think those are great points.
Yeah. And I was speaking of law enforcement training. So we used to do a check washing workshop, essentially like during one of the breaks, we would have all the officers check wash. And that's a really good hands-on activity to demonstrate the fact that gel ink will not lift an acetone versus the regular pen that we're all used to writing. And oftentimes we might get, but I don't write checks. How does this apply to me? Well, you might sign legally binding documents. You might be signing a police report. You might be signing something. Well, you want to use that gel ink. And so that would be kind of the better practice if you have to write a check or sign something.
So obviously the folks that are going to probably be most hit with this are going to be the elderly. And so you referenced the resource outreach to safeguard the elderly that you work with. So talk a little bit about what that organization does, and talk about we know that seniors are great at risk, but why do you think they are such a targeted entity?
Yeah, I sit on the advisory board for ROSE for short, and it's a Phoenix-based nonprofit. And where we see, two things. We have a newsletter that goes out, so that's the updating them and of scams and best practices and kind of current news when it comes to the cyber safety, cybersecurity world. But the in-person workshops, the one-on-one sessions that really are teaching seniors how to identify common scams, verify requests for personal information, or even just understand what the red flags are, end up being very valuable because you're in person. I just did one a couple weeks ago in person, and you get to have conversation back and forth with older adults. And I had a group of, I want to say about 25 older adults. Every single one of them, every single one of them pretty much gets some sort of scam text, call, email every single day. And to understand that they're not alone and that they have a room full of 25 people that they can now talk to about it, where versus staying quiet about it. Mm-hmm. And even for those who fell for something, to realize that it's okay to talk about it. And I think a lot of times older adults are afraid to talk about it with their family member or friends because of the shame, and they don't want to get their devices or tech taken away.
Yep. And how do you, so sorry, lost track of my question there. So what is in your experience, what's the number one way they're being targeted? Is it by email? Is it by text? Is it by phone? Which one are they the most vulnerable to?
So in my experience, it's the phone. So email, text, and voice calls are all kind of bucketed into that. Mm-hmm. But you're looking at a generation that wanted, one, you don't want debt in your name. You are kind, and usually, right, you're returning phone calls and you're going to answer if somebody says, who is this? And what's your name? And can I have this information? You might be more trusting. I should kind of bucket it that.
Yeah.
And so what's really scary, and you've probably seen this a lot in your work, is once you answer the phone and start answering questions and give up personal information that essentially helps these fraud rings, you're put in an entirely different bucket where they are hounding you every day, almost to the point where you're being harassed. I had this one lady in the class I taught a couple weeks ago where they come to her door demanding her personal information.
Wow.
And it's this weird, law enforcement has been told, filed police reports, but at the end of the day, they're still contacting her, being like, knocking on her door. What's your last 4 digits of your social? All these accounts open in her name. It's just, it's really sad, actually, because she doesn't have family to lean on. She has her community within the senior living, assisted living community, but I mean, they can only do so much, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
That's scary. And with everybody having, having conversations with our older generation, right? Sometimes there are things that are said and you go, is that true or not true? And that's probably also part of their issue, right? Is some people will not believe everything they've said. And maybe they've gotten confused. And so that plays into it. And that's completely scary stuff. So how do we fix identity management today and going forward? Like, what does that look like now? And what are the things we can put into place to make sure that the lady who's getting the knock on the door asking for the last 4 digits of her social security number stops happening, or she realizes that this is not right and does something? What does that look like now?
Oh, in a perfect world, right? I don't have the
queen
answer.
For a day. If you were queen for a day, right?
Oh, right. Yes, I thought I was today. Yeah. No. That's how I don't have an answer for that. There's not, and I wish there was, one thing that you could do. I mean, I think I would love the ability to opt out easier. I'd love the ability for transparency of, when I sign up for XYZ service, what does that mean for my personal identifying information? When I sign up, like, for instance, I was a guest pass member just this past week at my friend's gym, and now I'm getting, 3 or 4 different calls from the gym and then another affiliated product with that. I'm sure it's within the agreement that I signed off on, but I don't like that, so like that in itself. So they have my phone number, they have my address, they have all that information now. all because I was a guest at a gym. So I would love some transparency, because I'm going to opt out of that. Like, I don't want that. So
and I think the opt out piece is definitely give me the option, right? And that's what they're kind of doing in Europe with the controls and requirements over there. Mm-hmm. That's not here yet. I don't think it's going to come here anytime soon. But I've been having a lot of conversations with people about LinkedIn, right? They opt you in to using your data to train their AI, right? Mm-hmm. And people go, well, how is that going to really impact me tomorrow? And I go, it's probably not. But wouldn't you rather have the choice to opt into that versus being told that that's what you're doing, right? And so I think that is, I think the opt-in part or the opt-out part is definitely the only thing that you can do from an identity and education and the continued conversation with, the more you tell that story, the more it's frustrating that somebody's just knocking at a door asking for personal information. But that's the links they've gone to try and scam people, and it's all education. Conversation is really what it has to be.
Tell her to give them the wrong 4 numbers.
Well,
there you go.
But what's harder with this particular case is that there is some dementia involved, and so something that she might remember and be strong on one day might not be the next day, and that is really sad. What do we do about that? I mean, I'm not sure. And that's where if you are an older adult or you have an older adult in your life and you can be that trusted source for them versus them Googling computer fix or something, and that something that ranks higher might be a scam, but they have someone or a company to rely on. That is going to be a lot better for them than just trusting any old person that ranks the highest in Google.
Yep. That's why I say on my podcast all the time, if you have a senior person, friend, relative, neighbor in your life, let them know what's going on and try to help them understand that all these threats are targeting them because they have the money. They'll answer the phone. They're trusting of people. And that's the hard part to get over, is stop being trusting of people.
It is. And it's the holidays are a perfect time to bring up this conversation. Mm-hmm. And I'm not talking like, full on, I'm going to get a PowerPoint up, at my family Thanksgiving. But no, it's just incorporating a few. Oh God, did you hear about that scam? Or did you hear that person? It's their voice, but it's not really them. Can you believe that? And take complicated topics, whether it's complicated to you or not, and break them down into just a conversational tone to get the conversation going, to have people pull their phone out and say, oh my gosh, you have to see this text that I got the other day, and have them show you, be interested, because that right there is a perfect opportunity to talk to multiple, likely you're meeting with older adults during Thanksgiving, your family, your friends, your aunts and uncles, have it be normal conversation.
And on the other side of that, tell your younger kids to get off TikTok, but that's my own problem. That's my
Oh, don't get me started. We have a whole episode on that.
As I want to do. Paul, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think that it's important to help people. And you talked earlier about getting into this industry. And when I say industry, I mean InfoSec industry, and it was kind of by chance. But what encouragement do you have for others to try and get into this? And obviously there's got to be a passion. You don't do it. Everything you do should be because you feel, pulled towards it. And that's kind of what you're doing in some aspects of cybersecurity, is you have a passion for helping others. And so how do people get started? How would you educate people to get started? And maybe how, more on how you got, the deep dive into how you really got involved. But what would you say to people?
I like how you said it starts with a passion. It's so true. It does start with the passion. There are so many certifications, right? And it is overwhelming to decide which do I get my SSB? Do I get something like I have, which is a certified identity theft risk management specialist that's $375 versus, I'm not sure what the SSB program is.
$700.
But here's the deal. With me, I said yes to a lot of things, a lot of opportunities within my career journey. You start by talking up in a meeting. You have something to share? Speak in your 5-person meeting. That turns into speaking in front of your, entire company, whatever it may be. volunteer at your kid's school to talk. If speaking is a passion, or if just sharing this information is a passion. And then ways to promote that if you're just starting out is, if LinkedIn's your jam, great. Start posting more on LinkedIn. Be consistent. Consistent looks different for everybody. If it's every day, if it's every other week, whatever it is, you like to talk and talk to others, start a podcast. Start documenting that. And then that's going to grow. And my goal is to impact at least one person or influence one person with each post. I'm not doing it for me. I'm doing, do it for, the one person. So some are going to, be some posts that take off, and some of them will just be additional content that shows your thought leadership. But get excited about something and share that with others.
And that's meeting people where they are, right? That's putting everything out there and meeting them where they are. And that's why Darren does so much that he does, is because people intake something a little bit differently. I mean, there has been posts that I've made that, 4 months later, somebody is liking it or responding to it. It's like, well, that was 4 months ago, but for whatever reason, they stumbled upon it. And I think that's the whole thing, is we've got stuff to say. You've got stuff to say it. People are going to listen. And I've learned with the speaking as well, is people just want everybody else's opinion, because they want to be able to say, I did this because so-and-so said it was probably a good idea, right? Whether we want that responsibility or not, that's on us within this profession, is to educate people and continually educate people. So that's, I applaud you for what you are doing in that space to try and help people understand what it is, and probably simplify it too, because people think it's a very difficult topic. It's not. It's just how it's communicated and how it's ingested.
Yeah, the simplified thing is I'm really big in. There's always the fear-based message, right? You can go in with a fear-based message, but I believe that, yes, okay, if you're going to go in with a fear-based message, at least back it up with what you can do about it. Because where you talk about, meeting somebody where they're at, is they have, everybody's risk assessment of themselves and their business is going to be a little bit different. So if I explain to you, here's the scam, here's the vulnerability, here's what you can do about it, you can say, that's fine that I have all my connected devices in my home and my guests and me all on my Wi-Fi. Maybe you decide that's okay. Whereas somebody else might say, that's actually, that I hear that. I'm going to segment the Wi-Fi that I have available for my guests and my connected devices and me and my work and my kid. There's people
right.
And that's a great point, because I did that for a long time. Everything was, here's all the bad stuff. Here's all the bad actors coming at you. Here's China, here's Russia, here's Iran, here's the criminal guys, here's the hacktivists, here's all that stuff. And then at the end, when people would say, man, you really scared me, I'm like, yeah, I did my job. All right, yay for me. But now I've kind of changed that to, okay, let's think of this more of a positive perspective. I actually start out saying, this is no longer fear, uncertainty, and doubt. If you're at least here listening to what I have to say, you have already taken a positive step in trying to do better with the cybers, right? And kind of go down that route to that. It's not hard. You don't have to spend a lot of money. You don't have to, you don't have to buy the XDR program. You don't have to buy the EDR program. You can if you want. If you have the budget, fair, it's great. But you can do simple things that don't cost you a lot that can get you where you need to be. And at least you started down the road. Right. And don't you feel like the fear-based then tactics you would have used, I mean, you can incorporate those sure. in the positive message right. because it is backed up for why am I saying this? Well, this and this and this happened, mm-hmm. but it more complements it. So it's just a shift in how it's presented. And I find that is, it limits the amount of people that want to throw away all their devices and move to, a hole in Montana. yeah, right, so, exactly. which yeah. I would be fine moving to a hole in Montana. It's very beautiful there, but so.
I have a friend who I did a presentation for his group, and the next time I saw his wife, she was like, "Why can't I have any apps on my phone? Like, what did you say that does not allow me to play games on my phone?" Right? And you go, look, you don't want them to remember the fear. You want them to remember the thing that they need to do to fix and protect themselves as much as they can.
Right.
And I think that's what y'all are talking about. So it's impactful, but it's not the right impactfulness.
Play the game. Just don't share your contacts and location right. with the game.
Or at least know the game. At least know and that's the whole point of understanding the technology. If you're going to use an app, understand what it is truly doing, and don't just click yes to something, but also pick the one that everybody knows about, not the random one that nobody knows about.
I know. Yeah, I used to. Well, and I still do if I have long enough. But when it comes to apps and downloads, you can see how many downloads there are. So if there's, I don't know, a Target app with 100 downloads versus a Target app with 43 million downloads. Let's do the 43 million. Might sound obvious, but those are just like little low-hanging fruit and nuggets.
But that one's $1.99 and this other one's free. Isn't the free the same thing?
Same with free Wi-Fi. This is airport free, even though it says everywhere.
It's going to cost you something. It's going to cost you something, and that something may be your identity, right?
Yes.
That's the whole back to why companies don't spend the money now, but they're happy to spend the money when it happens, is because they're not thinking about protecting, they're thinking about the dollars. And that's not what we need to think about, because it's going to cost you more in the end.
Right. And we're having this conversation at a good time. It's budget season right now. So if they haven't submitted their budgets, start carving out some money. Whether you found a new hire, maybe you have a new hire or a service that you're gonna use, at least carve out some budget to explore that, because the alternative is not necessarily a path I'd want to go down.
So Paige, as I like to say towards the end, we're here for a good time, not a long time. So how do people find you if they want more information on what Secure Labs does, on what Rose does? How do people find you, locate you, follow you?
Yes, I'm very active on LinkedIn. So find me, Paige Hanson, and company website is securelabs.ai.
And if I may, if you can give me your address, I'll send you a free copy of my book if you like.
I would love that. Yes.
You'll read it and say, yeah, no kidding. I get that. But if you can give it to people who don't get it, and then the stories are good. The FBI stories are good. So there's that at least.
I love that. Yes. Thank you so much.
Well, Paige Hanson, thanks so much for coming on episode 7 of lucky number 7 of the Tactical Cyber Podcast. I hope we can speak again in the future. Actually, I'd like to just call you separately on some other stuff if you have time, but I'll hit you up on LinkedIn.
Yes. Perfect.
All right. Thanks, Paige.
Thank you.
All right, Paul. So what news you got for the week? Anything good?
Well, I was on Ars Technica earlier today, and there was an article about law enforcement operation taking down 22,000 malicious IP addresses worldwide. And I think that, right here at the holidays, it's another indication of trying to steal information. So when you get the email that says, hey, it's 75% off at your favorite store, don't click that link, right? Like that's the one thing, because it's a malicious IP. If it's truly a malicious link, go to the internet, type it in yourself so that you know where you're actually going. And I think that's the biggest thing that you need to tell people, especially at this time when they're buying a lot of stuff online, is just be mindful of what you're doing, because if it's gone quickly.
Yeah, I think our next episode is 2 weeks from today. Is going to be this Tuesday after Thanksgiving. So that'll be a good time. That'll be a day after Black Monday. So that'll be a good holiday reminder episode. So
that'll be a good discussion.
Yes, it will. So I don't have a news article per se, because I'm getting ready to do the Cyber Smart Morning News Update after this podcast. So I got to save some of those. But I read Brian Haguli. I'm mispronouncing his last name, but he had an interesting post on LinkedIn today where he did some research, and there's been 150 ransomware attacks in the last 5 days. Successful ransomware attacks in the last 5 days.
Wow.
And I reported on one yesterday. The Akira ransomware group did 30 in one day. So it doesn't seem to matter how much we talk about ransomware, we talk about what they do, we talk about the extortion, it still works. It's still successful. And the other thing is it's a drop in the bucket compared to business email compromise that we never hear about.
Well, and that's the thing, is it's happening, and that's, if we can have more conversations, like Paige said, if you can talk about it, if you can tell people about it, it makes them aware. And that's the big frustration when I'm talking to people. It's like, I know y'all never read articles. Just start reading the articles so that you know what's happening. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. This is not going to end in your lifetime or mine.
Right. And I'll say I had a presentation. You have any good presentations? I'll come back to your presentation. But I had one last week with healthcare. It was HIMSS, the Health Information Management, whatever they are. So it was, and I offered. So I got one question about, what technology should we not spend money on? Because I talked about you don't have to spend a lot of money for stuff. And that was a good question. I hadn't really thought about that, but so I didn't have a good answer. But then I said, for anybody in this room, if you want a free hour of consulting to kind of talk through where your posture is cybersecurity wise, here's my email address. So guess how many people email me?
None.
Exactly right. None. You can't even give it away. So I don't know how to win.
I've had a couple presentations. The conversations are always the same. What password manager do I use? Why is, talking about the multi-factor authentication. I was talking to a colleague who had a presentation to some financial institutions, and one of their questions was deepfakes. They wanted to know more about deepfakes, what it truly was, but not just what it truly was, but what do we do when we suspect it, or how do we prevent being a victim of a potential deepfake? And part of the conversation that we were having, and one of the tactical things I would tell people is, if you get a phone call requesting something, whether it's business or personal, take down the information, hang up, call the number is accurate, right? Because that could come from a malicious number, but it's showing as a regular number. Call the number find another way to ask the question, but don't take requests from an incoming with 100% uncertainty. Do the ones that you are doing outgoing, right? And never call the number that's on the email, because we know it's a malicious email, sure, right? And it's going to be a malicious phone. And I think deepfakes is one of those things that a lot of conversation during the election series was happening, talking about that. I think we're going to see it more and more, and you just got to be mindful and careful of if something seems unusual, it probably is. Question it until you can get to the bottom of whether it's real or not.
But I will say this: it seems like the bad guys are still lazy, because I still get the thanks for rejoining McAfee for $450. If you didn't, call this number.
Right.
And it's a different font. It's bolded. It doesn't match the rest of it. It's clearly a pic. I mean, come on. Have some pride in your job, for God's sakes.
And I always tell people, they ask, why are things so generic? And I go, it's because they're trying to hit 1,000 people at once, right? True. I always assume everything is fake until I get 4 phone calls from somebody saying, hey, unlike the person showing up at the door that Paige was talking about, usually they try to hit you once and they move on, right? That's how you know when something's real. Yep,
true. All right. Well, I hope you have good Thanksgiving plans.
You too. And I'm hosting here, so it'll be a lot of fun, and I'll make sure that deep fakes and cybersecurity is on the conversational topic list for the table. That'll be fun.
Right, awesome. But better in politics, so you got that going for you. Awesome.
Enjoy the discussion as always, Dan.
Thanks. You too, Paul. We'll talk again in a couple weeks.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Tactical Cyber Podcast. Please note that the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of their respective employers. If you have thoughts, comments, or suggestions on the Tactical Cyber Podcast, email Darren at thecyberguy.com. You can also follow Darren and Paul on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Darren Mott or linkedin.com/in/Paul M. Perry CPA. Paul Perry is a member of Warren Averett CPAs and Advisors, where he leads the firm's risk advisory and assurance services team, a group dedicated to optimizing businesses' financial, operational, and technology controls so that organizations can make strategic choices for sustained growth. Learn more at warrenaverett.com. Stay safe, stay secure, and we'll see you next time.